Tanse Jahanache. My name is Helen Knott, and I am a Danaza, Cree, Métis, and mixed Euro descent woman from Prophet River First Nations. I am the author of 2 nationally best-selling books, and I didn't go to school for writing. I was always surrounded by amazing storytellers, including my Atsu, my grandma. She was phenomenal. And before I ever learned how to write a story, I learned how to listen to stories. There's a phrase in Danaza that's sita un sitso, which means like sit down and listen. And often that was the indicator that story was going to be told. You were just told to listen. And when story comes into the world, it's not just story's responsibility to do the work. It's also on the listener. As a young person growing up being told stories and having to pull meaning, you learn how to build critical thinking skills, and you are building the ability to engage in self-reflexive processes. When I was young, I loved being told stories. And to this day, stories are a place of refuge. Indigenous story, whether it's written or it's orally told, holds complex bites of information. Like story is theory, story is data. If you sit and listen, sit down, sit so, you're gonna find that story holds our cosmologies as Indigenous people, our epistemologies, our ontologies, all of the ologies are in there. You have to understand that when you sit with story, you hear story or interpret it from your own cultural positioning, the beliefs that you grew up with, your ideologies, and even the realms of like what you believe is possible impacts how you understand Indigenous story. A long time ago, I was at the halfway river with my Atsu, and she picked this little medicine from the ground, and she said, "Here, my girl." And she placed that medicine in my hand, and she said, "I want you to roll it between your fingers and smell it." And she said, "Remember this medicine." She said, "This one is really good for if you have a wound and you're bleeding and it needs to be stopped. You can pack this in there and it'll stop the bleeding. It'll help you heal." And years later, like after she passed, I'd be walking down by the river or down in different places, and I'd find that little medicine, and I'd say, okay, whoever I was walking with, if it was my little cousin or my brother or my son, and I'd say, "Here, put this medicine in your hand. Roll it between your fingers. Smell it. Remember it." And in that moment, I felt my Asu with me. You know, she was a part of that moment. She was in my mind. And it made me think, who was in her mind when she showed me that? And realized through these acts of being on land, being in territory, of sharing knowledge and sharing stories, we're actually connected to all of those people who came before us. So I told the story of how the bear's tail got short to my son. And he carried that story into his 3rd grade classroom and stood up there and he told the story. And the teacher told me about it later. And I was so proud because it wasn't just the act of storytelling, it was an act of cultural continuity. It was saying, hey, we're here. This is a Danaza story and this is Danaza land. It's amazing to rest in story that is old like that. That's one of my favorite things, but it's just like how it was with that medicine where we're all together or threaded together through medicine, through land. But with story, you can sit with generations or call on generations who have told that story beforehand just by the act of opening your mouth. And that's magic. I used to talk to this Creek man from Oklahoma, and he was a cowboy. He had really long hair that reached to like almost the middle of his back that he wore in a braid. He wore a cowboy hat, and he had a little like southern twang to his voice, and he was pretty amazing. And at that time, we're not talking anymore, but at that time, I was like, okay, well, why don't you come up here to my territory and I'll host you here. You know, I'll show you around. And when we were talking about that, I was like, well, maybe I'll take you down to Saginaw Chi, so the big river or Peace River. There's a few different names for it, but my grandma called it Saginaw Chi, so that's the one that I use. And I said, I'll take you down there and you can introduce yourself. I'll give you some tobacco or an offering and you can say hello to the water. He was like, yeah, we can do that. He's like, I would really, really like that. It was at that moment that I realized that, having lost both my mom and my grandma, that the river and the land is now my mother. The river and the land is now my grandmother. It's something that holds memory for us, but also holds the memory of them. And that introduction was really important for me. Land is the keeper of memory. It holds not only the stories of our lives, but of those who came before us. When our elders, they start passing away, it serves as a reminder of what we've learned from them, where we've learned it from. Land becomes this catalyst for story and for memory. It becomes a reminder of how we're supposed to be in the world, how we're supposed to relate to each other, how we're supposed to carry out our relationships, our end of the relationships with land and with water, with animals, with everything that is. And, it acts as a relative. Back in 2018, I was selected as an emerging writer, and I was flown out to Toronto for this program where I was matched with an established writer. That writer was Daryl McLeod, who wrote Mama Scotch. While I was there, I went out for dinner with the other emerging writers. And so we were in this loud, busy downtown restaurant talking about artist things, and they were both writing memoirs. They talked about how memoir isn't a place for dreams, that you can't incorporate dreams into memoir because you can't verify that. Someone could just make dreams up. This was a really weird concept for me because I grew up in a family where dream was knowledge. Dream was something that we discussed over tables, over phone lines, over fires. Dreams were what guided our family, not even just our family, but Danaza people. Danaza people had Nache, which is the dreamers. And the dreamers would travel between here, this physical world, and the non-physical, or they would leave their bodies in a dream state, and they would bring back songs for the people that were prayers. They would also dream about the hunt. So in their dreams, they would see where a hunt would take place, and that would happen in the physical world. And there was no reason to question anything if dreams were valid, because you would later find evidence that they were. So that is the world that I grew up in, where dreams were valid sources of knowledge by which you can make decisions in your life. There I was in Toronto in this restaurant, and people saying you can't include dreams. And I was like, I didn't say anything because you choose the time and place that you want to argue, and it wasn't the time or the place, and I just didn't see the need because I had already included dreams in my memoir because dreams were valid. Dreams are valid sources of knowledge, and I have no need to defend that because it is. The Nache, back in the day, the dreamers, they would write their dreams on hides of animals, and they were called dream maps in English terms. And so these dream maps held a spiritual power, and often dreamers would be buried with their maps. Sometimes they would leave parts of their map behind for the people to help guide them and protect them in this physical world. Anthropologists that have worked in this area have talked about the last dreamers. I don't believe that dreaming has went anywhere. We don't have dreamers at the scale that we used to that would bring back prophecies at the level that they would, but we have dreamers all over in our communities that are pulling meaning from their dreams, that are receiving messages from their dreams. It's happening everywhere at all times. I've written 2 books so far, and I've incorporated dreams into both of my books. I am by no means a dreamer. I have dreams, I heed them, I try to make sense from them, I've developed a level of discernment when it comes to dreams, and I don't share all of my dreams either. So they're not all in books because you can't do that either. Some dreams are meant to be held close, but my books are essentially like my contemporary dream maps. They don't hold a spiritual power, but they are something that I leave in the hands of readers that will hopefully have a healing quality and hold some medicine for them and their spirits. So the way that I see it, from academic spaces to literary spaces, we need not ask for permission to include our indigenous knowledges or to fight to see them as valid sources of knowledge. During the discussion of my original research question, the hosting professor posed the following statements. If you are looking at decolonizing identity, you are saying that you are colonized. Act sovereign. I am who I am because I was raised by strong and fierce Danazao women who would put on a pot of coffee or sit on the phone if you had a dream to talk about, who shared their dreams, old and new. They essentially made dream maps by the stories that they told. And that's it. Listen better, tell stories, spend time on the land and tell those stories, move and create from a space where indigenous knowledges are valid, and act sovereign.